I would like to take the opportunity to thank the organizers of the Global Plasma Summit for the opportunity to present an overview of our efforts to address the COVID-19 pandemic. As outlined here, this presentation may contain forward-looking statements and the actual results may differ. So you are encouraged to review other sources, including our financial disclosures, for a more complete description. Since our inception 22 years ago, Emergent has been a global life science company focused on providing solutions for our partners for complex public health threats. Our company's long history of innovation and growth exemplifies our commitment to public health, expanding into other areas where we can have impact, such as infectious disease, opioid overdose emergencies, and travel health. We have a portfolio of 10 commercialized vaccines, therapeutics, and drug device combinations, all for the purpose of protecting civilians from public health threats. Our portfolio products address a number of significant disease threats, such as anthrax, smallpox, and new threats in the travel health and opioid overdose emergencies. We are a recognized leader in antibody therapeutics with a track record of success with several approved products and a diverse pipeline, including influenza and COVID-19 programs. Emergent leverages our proven technology platforms to address these emerging threats rapidly and to expedite development of new candidates. This includes our already validated GMP manufacturing and infrastructure, as well as the safety profile to support new products. We have established partnerships with the government, regulatory agencies, and scientific leaders with over 20-year history as a reliable partner, demonstrating successful execution on our programs. Now, COVID-19 represents a significant global challenge to public health and the global economy. Early comparisons to previous influenza pandemics made sense given the intrinsic characteristics of COVID are similar to influenza with a similar mode of transmission. However, additional factors have made this very challenging, including the transmission by asymptomatic people and the lack of immunity in the general population, and these have been key drivers of the current outbreak. Even with the anticipated availability of vaccines, there is expected to be ongoing transmission for the next few years, and possibly that the coronavirus will settle into a seasonal pattern. Emergent has joined the fight against the COVID-19 global pandemic together with several government and private partners. Our efforts span the spectrum of ways in which we can make a difference, from our own R&D and clinical development programs focused on the antibody hyperimmunes, as well as potential that can be used as well for potential treatment and for prophylaxis. Also, our Contract Development and Manufacturing Organization, or CDMO organization, has a number of partnerships for vaccine development that encompasses process and analytical and formulation development for partners such as AstraZeneca, Vaxart, and Novavax, as well as for vaccine manufacturing in partnership with BARDA, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Vaxart, and Novavax. So hyperimmunes, or hyperimmunoglobulins, are a well-established approach to disease treatment that have been used against a broad range of pathogens, including viruses, bacteria, and toxins. The platform contains polyclonal antibodies that bind like a lock and key to inhibit the virus and prevent infection of cells, block replication, and/or promote clearance. Our COVID hyperimmunoglobulin, or COVID-HIG, product leverages the immune response of individuals to target the SARS-CoV virus with specific and fully human antibodies that can then be manufactured from that plasma with added increased purity and orthogonal viral inactivation and removal steps to increase the safety of the product. As we have seen with previous infectious disease outbreaks, there is a continuum of care across which there are multiple points of potential intervention, whether it be to prevent infection, minimize symptoms, or slow progression of the disease, or then to treat the most severe disease. In the case of COVID-19, in the absence of a vaccine, there is an urgent and unmet need for early intervention and treatment to ease the burden on the healthcare system. In a recent analysis of more than 1.3 million laboratory-confirmed cases that were reported within the United States just between January and May, 14% of these patients required hospitalization, with another 2% requiring admission to the intensive care units, and the result was significant mortality. For individuals at risk of exposure, such as frontline workers, a hyperimmunoglobulin could also be important in the use prophylactically to prevent infection or reduce virus transmission. We have accelerated our COVID-HIG development programs and designed comprehensive clinical plans to cover a wide range of potential intervention points across the patient journey and maximize the impact on the COVID-19 healthcare burden. As a proposed treatment, COVID-HIG is being evaluated first in hospitalized patients or those at risk of progressing to severe disease. We are evaluating COVID-HIG in a phase 3 clinical trial in hospitalized patients sponsored by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID, which was initiated in early October. In addition, a second NIAID-sponsored clinical study is planned for initiation this year, and this phase 2 early treatment study will focus on the outpatient setting and evaluate COVID-HIG in COVID-19 positive patients at high risk of progressing to severe outcomes. Importantly, hyperimmunes can also serve to potentially prevent infection, and Emergent is also pursuing a post-exposure prophylaxis indication to evaluate COVID-HIG in individuals at high risk of exposure, such as our healthcare workers and the military and other frontline individuals. Initiation of this phase 2 clinical study for prophylaxis is planned to start later this year as well. To have a significant impact on COVID-19, it is critical to advance multiple potential solutions where we can leverage our expertise, capabilities, and partnerships across the continuum of care. Now, there are some significant areas of knowledge that are being filled in real time during the COVID pandemic, and we have been conducting a broad plasma screening program since March to identify suitable donors for manufacturing of the COVID-HIG product. We want to share some of our thoughts on some of the key questions and data that will be important coming out of this pandemic. The trends that we are seeing in our own sample screening align with results being published out of a variety of other groups, and our understanding of the virus and the immune response elicited in response to a COVID-19 infection will evolve as we gather more data throughout this pandemic. Some of the key questions that need to be answered still are: what are the antibody levels and where are they binding on that virus? We see that many patients that have recovered from COVID-19 infections have low levels of antibodies, and we do see that there are varying levels of antibody response in the general population. We also find that there's variability in which parts of the virus the antibodies are binding to, on the SARS-CoV spike protein being one of the areas most closely correlated with neutralizing. As we learn more about which parts of the antibody binding response are important, it'll be important to correlate this with the clinical dose and try to determine how to get consistency in the antibodies that are used to create the dose. Also, the contribution of IgM, IgG, and IgA is another question that requires some additional research. Initial work with the convalescent plasma found positive results affecting both the efficacy and the recovery from the virus. And what we find now is that there's differing contributions of these antibody subtypes. And as we work on the hyperimmunoglobulin that is a concentrated IgG, this will be an important question for us to answer. The last question that we posed here is just how long do the antibodies last after infection? And what happens when an individual is re-exposed to COVID-19? There are some studies that have reported a decline in the levels of COVID-19 antibodies after approximately 3 months post-infection, but we do find from our data set a lot of variability in that individual response, some people keeping their antibodies much longer. Emergent has a long and successful history of partnering with governments to meet their preparedness, response, and security needs. With the urgency of developing a COVID-HIG therapeutic in the context of a pandemic and for multiple indications, Emergent recognized that a number of familiar and novel partnerships would be key to accelerating the program into the clinic and ultimately to the patient populations in need. We have since initiated multiple collaborations as outlined here to support this strategy, including the funding, plasma supply and collection, as well as the clinical assessment for development of COVID-HIG. I wanted to take a moment here to highlight one of our key partnerships. So one of the challenges has been bringing recovered patients in to donate their valuable plasma and establish a plasma supply with suitable neutralizing antibody titers to SARS-CoV-2. To address this need, we formed a unique collaboration across industry, healthcare, and government, supported by funding from the U.S. Department of Defense, to advance the COVID-HIG for potential post-exposure prophylaxis indication. Mount Sinai in New York City has significant experience at the front lines treating over 10,000 COVID-19 patients, and they are leaders in COVID research and clinical care. To establish a new capability for plasma collection closer to the patients who have recovered, a new plasma collection site was established at the Mount Sinai Hospital System to collect plasma from their broad pool of donors. This was done in partnership with Immunotech, who is a leader in source plasma collection, and they specialize in the setup and licensure of centers. Immunotech provided valuable technical, quality, and industry experience in the plasma collection and provided the oversight and extension of the FDA license for source plasma collection at the Mount Sinai Center. This hospital, I'm glad to say, has already collected plasma from over 1,000 donors to date. Mount Sinai will continue to be our partner as well as a principal investigator for our clinical program to evaluate the COVID-HIG product for the post-exposure prophylaxis, focusing most on preventing infection in individuals at risk of exposure to COVID-19, such as our frontline workers. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for giving us the chance to share some of the details of our program, and I welcome any questions. I've included here my email address where you can reach out to me. Thank you.